Hello and welcome to the CX Files podcast. I'm your host, Mark Hillary. Rick Denton is the Managing Principal at CX advisory firm EX4CX based in Dallas, Texas. I've seen Rick publishing some articles recently on just how much CX will remain the same after the pandemic, even though everyone is focusing on the new normal. So I called him to ask, what will stay the same and why are we not focusing on it now? Okay, Rick, it's great to have you on the podcast. Thanks for being here. Now, I've heard you speaking recently, and I saw an article that you shared about the new normal. Most of the analysts we see are talking about the differences that we'll see in the CX environment. And I see that you've actually said there's actually a lot that's out there that is not going to change. So could you maybe just summarize, what do you think is staying the same, even though everybody is just focusing on the change?
Yeah, absolutely. And very happy to be here. Thanks for having me on this podcast. We do hear how much has changed, and there is a reality, right? There is a ton that has changed. I've got a son who is a freshman in college or in university this year, and his experience is completely different because of COVID, his senior in high school experience. So we had schools that had drive-through graduations. We've seen weddings taking place over Zoom. Obviously, the remote workforce has completely changed, right? And the willingness to do that and the discovery how productive that is. But while we're hearing so much about that, and we're hearing eardrum bleeding phrases like unprecedented or new normal, there are some fundamentals that just have not changed. And I've enjoyed talking to folks about how that hasn't changed. And it really is letting the customer tell you what the experience is, right? Getting a sense of the customer at the center of your business was true before COVID, it's true during COVID, and it's going to be true after COVID. The need to have the customer be your center and let the customer guide you on what is the best experience that they're seeking, where you can improve, where you've delighted them. Those are the areas that I have seen absolutely stay the same. And I think it's important for folks to be reminded that hasn't changed. And companies that embrace that reality are the ones that are going to come out on the backside of this more successful in their customers' eyes.
Okay, and so the first thing that you mentioned there was really voice of the customer. And we've always known that this is important. I mean, and it still obviously matters. But do you think that the reason that you're mentioning it here is that it's just not being measured very effectively?
I think it's measure, yes. And it's beyond measure. And I think I love the fact that you're saying the word measure, because there are a lot of companies out there that think survey and score is the way to go. I wish I could find the origins of that phrase, because I love it. I talk a lot about survey and score as the wrong way to go about it. And so send the survey out and clap in your meetings when the number goes up and shed a tear when the number goes down. But I'll ask you, Mark, how many times have you filled out an experience summary, regardless of type, whether it's email, whether it's text or anything like that, and put something in there that was about a particular experience, good or bad, and did you get a response?
No, never. And most of the time I don't fill them out anyway.
And you don't fill them out because you see no value in filling them out. And there's a particular car rental agency, no brands here, no names, not going to talk about it, but I used to be renting cars from them weekly. And there was a particular thing I wanted them to know about, and I would put in the survey every time. And finally, I just gave up. And I thought, clearly they are survey and score. They are not about listen and act. And I think this idea of total voice of the customer is going beyond survey and score and into listening and acting. And a lot of it is that act aspect of it. So when you talk about measure, I think that's a very important piece of it, right? How are you capturing what the customer is telling you, and what are the important nuggets that the customer wants to tell you about? But it's beyond that. It's then measure, it's listen, and then act. And what does that act actually look like is absolutely a key point.
Yeah. I mean, in your article that I read, you'd mentioned the importance of the frontline team, and they're actually the direct link between the brand and the customer. I mean, do you think that anything's changed after the pandemic? I mean, have they become even more important now?
I think what's changed is that the frontline is now getting more. Let me be a little callous here. Is getting more lip service. So companies are saying how important their frontline is, but only companies that are actually doing something about that and recognizing the importance of the front line. So let's go back to one of the first things you asked, and you talked about measure and how important measure is. Well, and even we just sort of chuckled there about, well, I never fill out the survey. And that is true for so many customers. But the customer is engaging with your front line and providing input every engagement that exists with the front line. And I've had many cases. So let me just use a call center type experience here, and that is, it's the CX guy in me, right? When something happens and I want them to know about it, I'll ask, hey, do you have a way for me to tell you for you to collect this feedback, for you to let somebody else know what happened here, so that maybe they can either improve it or something like that? And it's interesting how I get a diversity of responses. And I have interacted with companies where the agent said, absolutely, right here, got it, tell me the notes, and then they know that it went on somewhere. And that frontline agent that was confident that they had the ability to capture that information and then know that something was going to be done about it, is a much more engaged employee. It's something that clearly they are feeling empowered to raise these issues, knowing that these issues will be addressed. You can hear the opposite in the tone of the agents that I've talked to when it's not the case. Or if you're dealing in a real person, in real life engagement across a counter, and you can just tell the defeat in their eyes and in their body language when they know that they have to be a party to this negative customer experience, and there's nothing that's ever going to be done about it. And so having that input back from frontline into the call it corporate office or those that are designing things is important. But there's also the second part of that loop that I think is really important, that a lot of companies may or may not think about, or a lot of people may not think about, and that is, how do these customer experience visions, how do these customer experience plans, how do the insights feed back? So if you're getting information from the front line, how are you feeding that back to the front line? We see too many times that there are these customer experience initiative ambushes, I'll call them, and suddenly the front line is just buried with this new idea, but there's no why behind it. There's no context in it. There's no, hey, these are the 7 themes we heard over the last 6 months, and here's what we're doing about it, and you are a vital part of that. And getting the front line to be engaged with that circular loop of, I'm providing input, but then I'm also being fed the stories behind it, are an absolute key sort of circular loop of that respecting, understanding, and valuing your front line when it comes to customer experience.
Yeah, so that's kind of a combination of having the process in place for them to actually be able to do something when you ask, as well as actually the employee experience. I mean, getting people who are actually interested in helping. And I've heard a lot of companies recently talking about like fans of brands. So instead of just hiring a customer service agent and throwing them on any kind of project or type of brand that they need to support, you find the people that are interested in that specific brand that needs to be staffed. So you're already halfway there because they're interested in the product anyway.
That's right. And there is an audio, I'm simplifying their description because, again, I'm not going to mention names, but there's an audio company, a lot of speakers, a lot of car speakers, and but also home audio and that aspect, and on the higher end. And you can tell that the people that are inside their call centers, their order centers, their human channels, they were first audiophiles. Then they worked for this company. It is very clear that they love that great sound. They love great audio, and they love helping others experience great audio as well. And choosing to hire happy people, hire passionate people, teach them the skills of call center or order management or whatever that needs to be later, but make sure that they are fans of your brand is a great way to do that. Mark, one other sort of thing of how I see that interest in the front line or helping the front line, that feeding them, is this idea of inspirational storytelling too. So too many times the frontline might share a great experience, or even over social media, the customer themselves might share a positive experience or something like that. But being able to feed that right back to the frontline, both to the individual who delivered that great experience in a very exciting and a very, very celebratory way, not just some sort of check the box, hey, thank you for your service, and here you go, but really, really emphasizing and celebrating that. But then not just on the individual, the inspirational aspect of that, of telling the customer story wider across the company, is something that helps build that engagement with the front line, make them feel valued, and help them recognize that they are the true deliverers of great customer experience.
Yeah. That's really good. It's such a change of focus. Yeah. One thing that happened to me earlier this week was my bank app stopped working, and my bank advised me to update it on the App Store. And then I couldn't find it. I couldn't apply the update. So I was kind of stuck in a loop where I can't update the app, but the app is no longer working. And so I reached out to the bank, and the first thing they sent back to me was a message saying, due to COVID, this is going to take several days for us to get back to you. Do you think that, a year into this problem, any kind of customer service operation should be sent, automatically sending back a message saying, we can't serve you for like a week because of COVID?
So help me with the timing here. And now, as you can see here, as we're looking at each other in the visual part of it, my head just got defeated. I'm looking down at the ground, sort of, oh no, not again. When was this? How recently did this happen to you?
This was just this week.
This week. Okay. So here in the U.S., we sort of mark, oddly enough, we mark this week as when the pandemic, and I'm air quoting here, started for us in the U.S. And I know in other parts of the world, it started even earlier, clearly, right? So it is a year or greater since COVID has been an impactful element to our world. What an understatement that was, right? But if a company has not resolved something within a year, I can assure you the customer does not care about your COVID excuses. It is probably more maddening to be told that as an excuse than for the company to simply have ignored you. I think actually silence would be better than claiming this false excuse of COVID. It is not to deny the impact of it. This has been clearly one of the most impactful things that's out there, but you've had a year to deal with it, company. Don't blame COVID at this point. In fact, how often are we seeing the reverse of that, right? We are seeing so many companies that have used this time to retrench, to get a better understanding of the customer, get much deeper in their development in the digital tools that they've always said they wanted to develop, the employee experiences that they wanted to develop in the either remote, or as some are starting to come back to a hybrid type model. All of that, those are the companies that are doing something. To hear somebody say, COVID has kept us from solving this problem, just tells me how lazy they are. And I too, Mark, when I had just called a financial services provider who had sent me a card that said, hey, we think your account has had some issues with us, give us a call. So I do exactly what they say. And you would think that call would be the one that would be prioritized or something in a queue. I got straight to that same message of, due to COVID, our call volumes are higher than before. It loses me as a customer, and it loses others as a customer. I think of the airline industry as another one, where we're seeing, it's not so much the COVID excuse, but it's what is their reaction to it, and helping customers feel comfortable in that space. We see the ones that were choosing to block middle seats and really emphasizing that aspect of it. And then we saw those that simply didn't care. And I think a lot of what's going to come out of COVID is customers are going to have a long memory. This is not the kind of thing that customers will think, that was just that time. It'll be some strong memory of, how did the company treat me as a customer during this time? And whether that is blocking middle seats, or whether that is addressing the app or addressing an inbound call center, knowing what that company did during COVID is going to have very long legs and very long memory in customers' minds.
Do you think then that will really affect the recovery of some of these industries? I mean, things, travel companies, airlines, hospitality. I mean, the way that they've behaved during this process and the way that they've managed customers, will that be an integral part of their recovery?
It absolutely will be an integral part of the recovery when it comes down to the company level, right? So did the company respond? Did they address the issues in the right way? Did they, those will be the individual company's reaction, or I'm sorry, the response to that and how their business grows will absolutely be driven by that. But I think what's important for companies to know is that while we think that it's going to take forever to recover, and some of those are, there's so much negativity around business. But when we look back over prior events, and even some as dramatic, so we've had MERS, we've had SARS, we've had several other sort of medical things, we've had the financial crisis of the late aughts, we've had other sort of things. But if you look at the graph of international travel, it is stunning to see how the dip exists. And just using international travel as a barometer for the wider economic, a dip, and then it shoots off, shoots straight up. We saw that in each one, and even all the way back to an incredibly dramatic moment here in the U.S. of 9/11, and seeing where air travel, at times we thought we may never travel again, and we are easily double, triple, quadruple what we were coming out of the 9/11 travel dip. And so companies that are still looking to COVID or still thinking about it as an excuse for how their business is, need to use this time to realize the business is going to shoot up. Are we going to be a part of that rise, or are we going to miss out on it?
Yeah, and there is light at the end of the tunnel now. I mean, the vaccine rollout in the US is going pretty well. My own country, the UK, it's going pretty well. Where I live in Brazil, it's not actually going very well. It's going to take time, but it has started at least. So, what would you say to executives now that are sort of planning for the future, trying to see, what really matters to customers in this kind of post-pandemic environment?
I'd think of it in sort of three main things, right? And overall, let's not even go to the three main things. Let's just say this: focus on the customer. Let the customer be your guide. Let the customer centricity be the key part of your company. But I would say in sort of three things: build your ability to listen and act. If you aren't already listening or measuring, as we talked about earlier, whatever your listen is, don't assume it's just a survey. Don't assume it's just social media. Make sure you're understanding your entire suite of listen, but then make sure you're building your ability to act. How are you restoring the relationship with the individual customer that you might have disappointed? And then how are you listening to the full suite of your customer themes and using that to improve your company? How are you then using that information to inspire and celebrate and really build this true sense of coaching across your company to have the customer at the center? That ability to listen and act, I'd say, would be the first main thing. Check your connection with your front line. What do you have? Do you have a great process for receiving information from your front line, and do you have a great process for feeding information back to your front line? Not just operational checkbox type things, but the customer stories, the customer input. What are you doing with your connection with your front line? And then lastly, I'd say, in that vein of excuses, don't waste this moment to know your customer and build that best experience. Don't waste it. This is a moment that, God willing, we never see again, but use it. It was a horrible moment for the globe, but leverage this moment and make sure that you are putting the customer at the center. I was, to kind of that customer centricity thing, I was at a company before and was talking to them about helping them become more customer oriented, right? Let's just leave it simply there. And so I went to one of their operational meetings. And by the way, this was a company that was customer focused. It was a company that talked about their brand, was externally all about the customer and delighting the customer and everything associated with that. And I was at a meeting where it was an hour-and-a-half long meeting, and we spent an hour and 17 minutes before we heard the word customer mentioned. And that was something I brought back to them immediately, saying, hey, in this time when you are so worried about COVID and surviving and all that, you didn't even talk about the customer until you were nearly done with your meeting. Bring the customer to the beginning. Bring them to the front of your meeting. Bring that customer centricity right front and center with your company, and that will be that overarching theme that drives you through, whether you go down the three things that I just mentioned or not, if you start with the customer as the center, they'll guide you into what the right solution is for your business.
Thanks for downloading the CX Files podcast. If you have a moment, please give us a star rating or review on your favorite podcast provider, because this really helps other people to find the podcast. If you have any suggestions for future guests, or ideas, people, or topics, then please just find myself, Mark Hillary, or Peter Ryan on LinkedIn and send a suggestion.